And those types of thoughts made me understand, okay, I need therapy for childhood. I need therapy to break those stereotypes. I need therapy for my grief. And in order to not perpetuate these stereotypes within this community, I need to do work on myself.
Welcome to Mama Mabel's Caregivers podcast, where we have honest conversations about caregiving, grief, resilience, and the healing that happens when we feel seen and understood. Today's episode is titled, When Grief Has No Words, How Storytelling Helps Caregivers Heal. For many caregivers, grief begins long before a goodbye. It's the quiet ache of anticipatory grief, caregiving burnout, and carrying emotions that can feel impossible to explain. But what if stories could help us find the words we've been searching for? Joining us today is Justin Anderson, also known by his pen name, Vaelorin, founder and creative director of VaelorinVerse, a unique dark fantasy universe where mental health becomes the magic system. A network engineer by day and storyteller by night, Justin creates modern folklore inspired by the people society often expect to carry their burdens in silence, including caregivers, veterans, and first responders. Inspired in part by his mother's decades of work in mental health case management, Justin's storytelling explores grief, healing, resilience, and the invisible wounds so many people carry. If you've ever struggled to put your grief into words, this conversation may help you feel a little less alone. Let's get into it. Well, welcome, Justin. How are you today?
I'm doing well. Thank you for having me.
Thank you so much for agreeing to be a guest on Mama Mabel's Caregivers podcast. Having a conversation that we had prior to this episode, I just felt what you had to offer is incredibly interesting and heartfelt and will help a lot of people. So, with that said, I'd like to tell the podcast family what this is about, this episode. Podcast family, today's episode is When Grief Has No Words, How Storytelling Helps Caregivers Heal. And today we have Mr. Justin Anderson, who has experience as being a caregiver, as well as creating something great that not only helped him, but can help others. So with that said, Justin, please tell me about yourself.
Well, thank you. So, my name is Justin Anderson. My pen name is Vaelorin, and I created kind of a transmedia universe unexpectedly as a way to cope with my grief that I didn't actually know I had. So, during my years in high school, during my 10th grade year, my grandmother was diagnosed with stage 4 colon cancer. And I didn't really know how to deal with that growing up during the 90s, where all the males, we got to be tough, we can't be vulnerable.
No one plans to become a caregiver. One day, life changes, and suddenly you're managing appointments, medications, emergencies, and trying not to lose yourself in the process. That's why I created Mama Mabel's Caregiver Resources. From emergency planning tools and caregiver organization systems to my 90-day caregiver self-care journal with daily wellness reflections and nourishing juicing recipes, these resources were created to support the person behind the caregiving. Because caring for someone you love shouldn't mean forgetting yourself. Scan the QR code on this video or click the link in the description below to explore the resources created for caregivers by a caregiver. You don't have to carry it all alone.
You're not supposed to cry. And that led to me suppressing my feelings and my emotions and being just angry all the time. There was a lot that I kind of learned from that situation that wasn't really expected. My grandmother being the first person to hold me when I was born, and living with us, it was someone who I knew my whole life, and I never experienced a loss like that, or the effect that cancer would have on people, where you slowly watch them change, lose weight, the shine and sparkle that they had kind of dims. And that led me to, helping care for her. And me and my sister and my mother spent a lot of time kind of rotating shifts. And one of the hardest things during those times, of course, is, hearing that person cry in pain and knowing you can't do anything about it. Uh, that became something that during the time I didn't know I was doing, but I was suppressing it. And, I'm thinking I'm doing what men are supposed to do. And then come to find out 18 years later, I'm sitting down to write a story as a quick side hustle. Figure I would do like 4 friends, 4 swords, defeat the demon and move on. And all the grief that I suppressed and childhood trauma and things came out, and it became a whole universe that was built on the premise of everything that I wish I had during that time. I decided to build for someone else because that's what I needed. I needed a place where grief, trauma, just sitting down and crying was okay. And I didn't have that during that time. So I built it for other people.
Wow, that's very beautiful and it just very deep. I like to go back to your teenage years where you said you found yourself taking care of your grandmother, but also suppressing your feelings during that time. While you were taking care of her, were you still able to play sports or were you in band? Were you able to really function in school during this time
Uh,
period? What was that like for you?
um, Honestly, no, it was a kind of a bad mix, really, because where I lived pretty much all my life, we moved from there. It was kind of like my sister she just pretty much finished school. So she was a nurse. And her dream, of course, was for my mother to experience a higher quality of life. So where we lived wasn't the best area. We lived around some drug dealers and other people. So we moved. So at that point, I didn't have my license or anything. So pretty much it was like I was kind of alone, and school was pretty much the only place I really had social interaction. But for me, again, and especially in like the Black community, we're told you're the man of the house. It doesn't really matter your age. So if there's no father or no male role model, then you're the man of the house. So I'm focusing on those thoughts of being the man of the house. And I'm seeing my mother, take my grandmother, of course, her mother's passing, and the effects cancer has really hard. So I'm trying to limit her time of seeing it. So I'm like, hey, I'll stay home with her. I'll do this. And realistically, I didn't know I had depression. I knew I wanted to sleep all the time. I knew I was just angry when I was awake. And even in school, I felt myself just either sleeping or trying to find ways to just isolate myself from people. I was blessed to have a couple of teachers that paid attention and noticed, and that helped some. But due to me being quiet, uh, and I'm not a small guy, I'm not like tall, but I'm very broad. So most people were already afraid of me. So that kind of also isolated me more. Because they would look at me and they would be like, oh, well, I don't want to touch him. He looks angry and I don't want to talk to him because he may hurt me. And during that small time, not only was I closed off and shut down, but then I also was dealing with teachers who had racism or who were racist. And the probably the most interesting part of some of this is I had to pass government to graduate, and on my report card, I failed, and I still have my diploma. And that was probably the most interesting thing that I never got to ask that counselor during that time if he just understood, because the teacher never wrote down any scores or anything. And this is the one thing I will say that thankfully, I guess I did have depression. I didn't throw any papers away. I just threw them all in the bottom of the locker so I had proof. She never put any of my grades in during that time, and he never explained anything about it, but I remember him looking confused, and I remember being angry to the point where I was honestly concerned that I would do something that would not allow me to be here having this conversation with you, because that was a promise I made to my grandmother. But functioning was basically kind of like non-existent for me. When I went to school, it was kind of horrible because I was dealing with those teachers in kind of isolation from, classmates. And then when I was at home, it was, you know, mourning someone who is still alive and sitting right next to you and not having any type of outlet for it.
Wow, thank you for sharing that with the podcast family. I sincerely resonate with that because when you have a loved one who is dying, as you stated, your grandmother has stage 4 cancer. Speaking from experience, you see them and they're slowly passing away. Like you said, they're losing weight, their mobility changes, and you find yourself as a caregiver really giving it all that you can. And even in your case, because you were the man of the house, even trying to carry the burden for your mother because not wanting her to hurt. So trying to take that on, that was a lot. Did you have any relief? Were you able to release it in any type of way? Was there anything that you did that was able to help you during that time?
During that time, no. For a few reasons, as I got older, I understood. Number one, it goes back to, like I said, the stereotypes that are perpetuated on males in the Black community. Therapy isn't really something that we really push within the community back then. And then the stereotype of being male just always being strong. So I thought just being angry was the way to handle it. Truly, I had a lot, I didn't have a lot of coping ways to cope. I felt myself, you know, punching things when I got angry, like the wall or the floor or anything. I got a lot of scars on my hands from that. And for a short time, it did feel like relief, but I think it was pain of being able to just hit something and you feel like you're okay in that moment. It wasn't really relief. And my sister, while she was there and I could have talked to her, she understood because she was a nurse. So she understood what that prognosis meant. And she also understood that my mother, even though she had other brothers, was in it pretty much all along. She was going to have to make the hard decisions. She was going to have to carry this without any help or any financial help. So my sister worked more in order to make sure that she could get, enough money. She, kind of locked her feelings away, and I just felt like she didn't care. And while I could have talked to her, I was felt myself angry at her all the time because I'm like, you don't even care that our grandmother's dying. And I was completely wrong. And my mother just wasn't ready for any type of conversation, you know. So I used to write a lot, and this is kind of a concept that I've started walking around that made sense why I ended up experiencing writer's block. Um, I started walking around the concept of grief having two doors, and there's an I door, the internal, when you internalize something. So a lot of therapy and a lot of grief starts with I. I am feeling sad, or I feel mad, or I'm unhappy, or anything like that. And I wasn't ready for the I statements. But in grief, there's also a E, there's externalization. And I feel like that would have helped me, because that's what ended up helping me 18 years later. But that's never really talked about very often during grief. Every time we talk about grief, it's always in the context of I. So I ended up not having really any relief at all. And besides sleeping, which wasn't healthy. So to answer the question, no, I didn't find relief during that time.
So, how did you make it through that experience? Your grandmother has stage 4 cancer, and at some point she passed. Let's talk about that transition and where you were.
Making it through it, honestly, was, I won't even say probably, I'll say was because she passed. So she passed, uh, let's see, about 3 months into March of my 12th grade year. Uh, and during that time, I was a dumb, typical teenager, and I always thought I had another year to make up my grades. Now, I wasn't horrible in school. I was horrible at math, but I wasn't horrible in school. I kept my grades mostly passing. Math, I tend to struggle, and I would always have like almost failing, but wasn't quite failing. But my grades weren't where my grandmother felt comfortable, where she could be like, "You're gonna graduate, and I'm gonna see you graduate, baby." You know, and she died never really having that settled in her heart, and that became my motivation, um, to push forward. At that point, when she passed, that was my promise to her. I made two promises. One promise was I would graduate. There was no ifs, ands, or buts. I did not care what it took. The other promise I made is she was the first person to hold me in when I came into this world. And no matter how much I was grieving or hurt, I would make sure that I was the last person to carry her out this world. I wanted to make sure that I carried her casket. And that those two promises is what held me through school. And it when I said that I had that bad incident with the teacher, that's where that anger was because I made a promise to my grandmother who passed, and now that was being affected by something that was outside of my power. And luckily, like I said, it worked out, but those were the reasons that I was able to continue moving forward, was those promises. And after the funeral, after the graduation, it became a different kind of weight. It was still grief, but it was like this. I don't really know how to explain it. It was almost like where if they were to touch your shoulder and just tell you like, it's okay, baby. Like, I'm proud, you did good, and just let you know I'm still here, but I'm not in pain or anything. And it was a different kind of weight that I started carrying after that moment.
Wow, that's really deep. And it's very touching that you were able to make a promise to your grandmother and you used that to pull you forward. And with that said, you were able to pull yourself forward with the promise and by the promise that you made to your grandmother. The reason why I asked that question, and I thank you so much for sharing your response, caregiver family, we're out here taking care of our loved ones. And sometimes we need something that's able to pull us forward. When you don't have the strength to move forward anymore, when you don't have the strength to even get out of bed or to function, what is that thing that pulls you forward? And in this case, Justin identified what was able to pull him forward, and that was the promise that he made to his grandmother. So, very beautiful. Thank you for sharing that with the podcast family. So, you graduate from high school and you're living life, you're on your journey, and then you begin to create what you have created. And I'm going to let you talk to the podcast family about this. Tell us about it. How did you come up with this wonderful website that's used to help caregivers and also for grieving? Tell us about the whole process.
Well, that was the most unexpected invention out of all of this, the unexpected creation. It took shape, and it took shape extremely fast when my grief started pouring out. Like I said, it was supposed to be a simple side hustle. I've been writing, since I was young. I felt like a lot of the stuff I was hearing that was becoming extremely popular kind of had the same pattern, and I could do it. And like I said, I sat down and I was like, I'm gonna write, I'm gonna do this. And all of a sudden my grief and trauma came out. And I grew up on a street in an area where there was about 3 Black people. So I spent a lot of time experiencing racism. And, a lot of times you hear, well, you can always turn the other cheek and don't fight. But my choices were to come home with my clothes ripped and beat up every day or fight. And I ended up my mom my mom and my grandma let me know, yeah, you need to fight back. And that was also the choice I made. And it did stop. But I also ended up being blamed within the neighborhood for a lot of things, just virtually everything, if I'm being honest. Even to the point where there would be times I wouldn't go outside and I would still have police come knock at the door saying I did something. So I spent a lot of time being kind of ostracized and, shut out. And then there was only one family, other family, that never viewed me that way. So that was really pivotal in my life. So that trauma started to come out. And then the grief that I had during the time and the suppression of all that grief during 18 years of, holidays and birthdays and, memories of my grandmother and during high school started to come out. And that started to build these characters into different characters. They were no longer surface and just nice, cool characters that people may like, but they started to develop real depth. And I found, mental illness in different type of invisible weights being on these characters. Some have survivor guilt, some have abandonment issues. The main character I found kind of feeling like myself, where I'm very good at taking in emotions from surrounding places, other people, in almost like a kaleidoscope, splitting that emotion that I'm taking in into different folklore, to different pieces to build something. And that led to me building, the first version was my pen name, Vaelorin.com. Now that went downhill. I learned a very valuable lesson that I did not know when it came to business. And I'm used to using, like, you look at Google reviews and trust pilots and things to know, oh, do I want to buy that product? Business is not the same way. I ended up hiring a web developer to build a website. And long story short, one piece of advice I would give to your podcast family is, if you're going to build a website, and I understand some people may not have technical background, domain registration is easy, very easy to do. I advise you to look it up, learn to do it, and to register your domain yourself. I basically got scammed because they registered my domain for me, and then they registered it to themselves, which means that I no longer own it. And I would either have to buy it from them or pay, like, I think it's like $5,000, $10,000 to go through the process of getting it back. And if you're not a big company, that money's not worth it to you. But then that name is also, depending on what you use it for, is important. They basically try to hold me hostage by telling me that, they owned everything and they wasn't going to give me the website or any of that. And being a network engineer, I understood at least the technical side of it enough to know, okay, I could back this up, move it to a different domain, get access to it, but I still lost my original domain name, which is the name you type into a search bar to get somewhere. And that's where VaelorinVerse was born, because I needed something else. And although that was horrible, it built something so much better, because the site that they built for me did not have the impact, the emotion behind it like this does. And I had to rebuild this all myself. I lost that money, and basically about $2,000-$3,000 roughly I lost. And I learned to code and build it myself, and I'm glad I did it. So that led me to building this site. And as I was building it, I kept having different thoughts on what I missed back when I needed, what did I need back during the time I was a teenager. And one of the things that came to mind was, one of the first things I built was a memorial wall. Not because my grandmother didn't have a gravestone or anything, but there's times where life gets busy and you want to go out to the graveyard and you can't, and then you start feeling bad. And my mother was starting to get depressed because it was winter and she couldn't go out, and felt really, really bad. She's like, my mama's going to be mad at me. I haven't cleaned her gravestone out. I mean, not out, but off. And the memorial wall was the first thing that I thought about, a place where she can honor, she can visit without needing to leave the house. And it kind of expanded in my mind as, but this also could be helpful to other people. What about, soldiers who maybe are plane crash victims, people where the body couldn't be recovered, or people who had miscarriages and they don't have something to bury, or they can't afford headstones. This is a place where they could honor those losses, and everybody honor alongside them. And another thought about the memorial wall was my grandmother, before she passed, she was the last of her siblings, so she didn't feel no one could understand that type of feeling of being the last of her siblings. And it was something that I thought, would have been something nice for her, because it's like she could have, remembered the name, and other people who may have been in that same predicament could have remembered the name. And now she doesn't necessarily feel as alone because there's someone walking this path next to her. And that started my mindset of building different tools to assist people going through grief or trauma. That led to the Whisper the Veil, where people who have, negative thoughts, you're having a really bad day, a horrible time, and you start to feel alone sometimes. You're like, just one more thing happened to me. And it's that type where you wake up, you go to get out of bed, you spill something. Then you go to do the toothpaste and you ain't got no toothpaste. And then you spill the coffee or something. And it's like, why is everything happening to me? And you're just like, oh my gosh, I got to have the worst luck in the world. And the more things continue to happen, the more alone you feel. And you look around and you're like, there's nobody having as bad of a time as me. And that's where the Whisper of the Veil kind of came in, was a place for people to release those negative thoughts. And it's not there to just say, oh, well, you release this negative thought, have a happy time and life will get better. But it's where you can see other people who've done the same and realize again, my mentor, Natasha of NAR Creative, she used the term parallel. She's like, you walk in parallel with people and you never realize it. And you're in your own misery. But if you were to look to your left or your right, you would normally find people who are walking along you in that same path. And we don't typically do that. And that was kind of that mindset put into practice, where it's like, I'm having a bad day. Life is horrible. And then you look and you like, okay, well, I'm not alone in it. It still sucks, but there are other people who are having the same type of trouble I'm having.
Wow, okay. You created this website, as you stated, to be a place where people can come to and they can use that'll help them with grieving, as well as just the emotions that come along with it. Being a caregiver, for an example, during your experience, did you ever seek out therapy? And if you decided not to, what were the reasons?
I did. I went through therapy a few times, and I find this very important. So I'm glad you asked that question, to share with people, because what a lot of people do is that they'll go to therapy, they'll have a bad experience, and then they're kind of done with it. And what I learned the first time I was in therapy, she wasn't bad, by no means, but she wasn't the right type of therapist that, for the way that my mind processed things, I needed. Um, I personally felt like she was very overly agreeable. I didn't want her arguing with me now, but I just felt like I needed some kind of resistance that wasn't there in it. For my mindset, it kind of messed with me, because I felt like I can't always be right. And it made me feel very self-conscious. Um, so we ended up parting ways. When it comes to therapy, and finding a therapist, a lot of people don't realize that it's like picking out a place to eat, or an outfit, or your favorite color. You may not find the exact fit right away. It may take a little bit of searching, and you may have to try again and a couple of times. I went back to therapy when I started this process. Like I said, my grief, my trauma was coming out. And the incident that made me seek therapy was actually, I started writing a course, and I was like, I'll join a writing group, because I've been doing this all my life, but I never knew the proper terms. I never studied it. I just was what I did. And joining a writing group, um, I never knew the writing world could be so toxic. uh, Anyone who's been a part of it probably seen it. There's a lot of reasons that they will tell you you're not a real author or a writer, or why you can't do this and that. And long story short, the way that I write is, I'm not a plotter, which basically means I plan out everything, but I don't feel like I'm quite a discovery writer either. Normally, they kind of have a vague idea of what they're going to write, like a lighthouse or a North Star, and then everything between they're just kind of figuring out as they walk towards that end goal. Um, I consider myself closer to what they would call a method actor. Those are the actors that you've heard about that get so immersed in the role where it takes them therapy to reset and become themselves again because they basically live like their character. They'll, if their role has to do with them being like, you know, some kind of person in the woods, they will go live out in the woods for months in order to embody that character. That's really close to that's how I write. Um, some of the trauma, some of the grief and pain I do know, but the other portions is more like living inside the character head and then coming back and just writing down what I see from watching them. And I wasn't able to explain that. And it led to just a lot of backlash because they wanted to understand what I was and I couldn't explain it. So, you know, they were like, "You're not a writer. I would never read your book." And it was just horrible. And as I mentioned earlier, that childhood trauma being ostracized, I didn't know how deep it ran until having that moment. And I was like, it really messed with me. And I was like, this isn't healthy. This isn't normal either for me to feel this way, especially amongst, you know, granted, there were a lot of them jumping in, dogpiling, but I was like, for people I don't know, this wasn't, this seemed too intense of a feeling to just be because of that moment. So at that moment, I was like, you know what? I got kids. I've been through the stereotypes. Um, and sadly, which when I say I have kids, I have twins on the way. I have a 6-year-old by my current wife, but I also have a 18-year-old that I legally adopted. He was from an ex that we were never married. I just felt like his life would be, it would be more advantageous for his life if I was to adopt him. So I met him when he was 2, and I was young, you know, in my 20s. So I made a lot of the same stereotype mistakes. You know, I found it hard to hug and just embrace him because he was a male child, you know, and those types of thoughts made me understand, okay, I need therapy for childhood. I need therapy to break those stereotypes. I need therapy for my grief. And in order to not perpetuate these stereotypes within this community, I need to do work on myself. So that led me to seeking therapy again. I found the therapist. We get along really well, and it's a great match. And her framework, for those, I won't go really deep into it, but there's different types of therapy. Like there's, you know, CBT, which deals with you confront something and find counteractions, but there's also like narrative therapy, which kind of is more where I'm at, where it's like telling a story and then reauthoring it. You kind of rewrite your story to what you want it to be within your life and kind of go through that. So a lot of people just think therapy is just one thing, and this is why it may take you a little bit to find the proper therapist. But yeah, I'm back in therapy, and I found the therapist that fit me, and it's going really well.
Good. That's great to hear. And I mean, there's so many things that you said in there that just, I call it jewels and just words of wisdom during your journey that you've experienced. I thank you for sharing that with the podcast family. So, as it pertains to your website, let's talk about that. How does one go about using it? Let's talk about the features, the attributes. Let's talk about it.
Well, my goal with the website was to give people multiple entry points, for, those who, like I said, lost someone. They may come in just using the memorial wall, just to honor that person they lost. And right now it's kind of simple. You'll watch it weave the name and your message. I'm hoping to build that out later on, with more funding and more time, to where you'll see like an actual veil in the sky. The names will be hovering, and you'll see threads coming down to like the states where people remember the names, get things like that. But the memorial wall is one way and one thing that people may come in. For those who, like I said, are feeling overwhelmed with, maybe a really bad day, they may come in on the Whisper of the Veil. A place that a lot of people have entered is through the folklore. I've written multiple folklore. Like I said, I tend to do really well with being a witness. I may not have experienced everything, but I'm really good at sitting and witnessing people so they feel seen, and not trying to fix them, but just really just being there in that moment. And that led to me writing a lot of different folklore that basically honors the invisible weights of different occupations in different moments in life. I have folklore that probably one of my biggest ones is honoring survivor guilt that you may see amongst like paramedics and firefighters, which came from a true story of a Alabama civilian rescuing 12 individuals from a burning complex, but he wasn't able to reach 3 of them. And I watched this video in this interview, and it really stood out to me because throughout the interview, and this is my opinion, because I've never been able to speak to the young man to ask him, is this, am I right or not? But I was watching, and the whole time the news, the people around him, they're like, you're a hero, you rescued 12 people. And he told the story, and how some were trying to go back in and get their phones and all this nonsense. But when he got to the 3 that he couldn't save, he was like, but I couldn't reach those 3. And they're still calling him a hero. And as the interview goes on, while he answered questions, he would come back to that. He was like, if I would have had a better jacket, I would have got those 3. And then they go on and they're still saying he's a hero. He's like, I would have got those 3 if my jacket was better. I wouldn't have cared if I had to risk myself. And his focus was those 3 that he could not save. And that led to burning guilt, because I was like, this must be what it's like for firefighters and first responders who can't save people. And I did a podcast with a paramedic / firefighter who validated that. It's not about the ones they did save, it's about the ones they didn't. And for caregivers, I wrote one called, Tears of a Caretaker. And this touches a lot on what we're talking about. And it was for my uncle, who his wife has been diagnosed with Alzheimer's. And there's some friction, between beliefs and healthcare sometimes. And for him, as we talked about, watching someone, mourning someone that's still alive is different from mourning someone who's gone. And the friction comes in where he feels sometimes that he's maybe not believing hard enough, because that's what he's told, that, if you believe hard enough, you can pray away, she'll get better. And he's in this bubble of not being able to grieve, because if he grieves, well, he's not believing hard enough. So he's disrespecting his faith. if he doesn't grieve, then he's suppressing it. And we had this same cycle we're talking about. So I wrote a folklore for him, kind of acknowledging how love changes, and you're grieving someone who's still there. And it's not that you're grieving them because they're gone or they're dead or anything. What you're grieving is a version of them that you will never get to meet. And for him, he had visions of, being, I mean, they've been together for 30 plus years, but still growing older and watching grandkids. And this version that he pictured of her that he planned to be with is the version that he lost. While she's still living, he still lost someone. And a lot of people don't understand that. And I wrote that to acknowledge so he could kind of have that peace and understand that while she may not remember everything, but he loves her enough, and I know that he will remember and carry for the both of them. And that led to those types of pieces of work. So I have various works that touch on different occupations, different traumas and griefs for caregivers, for firefighters, that touch on those invisible weights because I felt like they were really important. And it uses a lot of terminology from my world. In my world, I use threads, and threads is your soul, and your thread is affected by your mental state. So if you are suppressing and you're going through a lot of grief and trauma and you're suppressing it and not dealing with it, your threads begin to fray. If you are, processing it and dealing with it, your thread will reweave itself. And that's how I kind of explain it. So in a lot of my work, you'll hear, or if I do any type of artwork, you will see threads that are typically tied to the wrist of one person to the other because your souls are tied and that bond is continuous, whether that person is still living or not. You're not, that love just takes a different form. Or sometimes I'll use the phrasing, they're not gone, they're just further along the thread than you are.
Just thinking about the whole concept of folklore that is able to identify and resonate with people who have experienced grieving, who have also experienced being a caregiver, and you've been able to weave that into various storylines that will offer comfort, acknowledges where they are in their journey, provides them with information, and it's also designed to help uplift them during their journey. I think that's pretty awesome. It's pretty cool. Tell me more about your website because I understand that there are other components to your site as well.
Yes. So there's a few more components. My goal originally wasn't to have it be so cohesive, but what I ended up finding out, I wanted to do something that was kind of community related for people who they don't really like therapy, again, for different reasons. Maybe people, and I hear a lot of times they feel it's too clinical, which I've thought about different things to do with that as well. But this led me to talking to a narrative therapist who ended up being somewhat confused because she thought I studied narrative therapy because my work aligned really well with it. She thought that either I was studying it or I was in the field. And I was like, I just wrote what I needed to get off my chest. And once looking into it, uh, my work does align really well with narrative therapy, really well with IFS. A lot of the principles are reflected in the way that my stories are structured and the things they touch. So I was like, this could be maybe a way of bridging that gap from self-help to therapy for people in a manner that doesn't make them feel like it's so clinical. This led to me discovering a few reasons why I felt like people don't like therapy, and I've been able to talk with therapists about it. One of them was what I mentioned earlier, was like the grief and the way that people normally with therapy, they start with the I, and some people aren't ready to use I'm hurt, I've lost, or I. And if they were using externalization, and we do this already. I'm sure you've seen or heard someone be like, well, I got a question. I got a friend that likes someone or they did this. What do you think about that, when they're really talking about themselves? That's externalization, where you're distancing yourself from the problem. And it allows you sometimes to see the problem more clearly because you're not in it and you're not focusing on how you feel about it as opposed to just the problem. And when talking to therapists, what I thought about and realized, and this is where my lore kind of played a part, was going to therapy is like learning a second language. And unfortunately, it's learning a language that has stereotypes and stigmas attached to it already. If I was to sit here and tell you I'm sad, I feel broken, I'm hurting, you may be like, are you okay? Or you may give me advice, but you would interact with me. If I came and I was like, well, they say I got dissociative identity disorder with manic depression, and sometimes I may have schizoaffective mood swings or something. You're going to kind of be like, if you know it, you may be like, okay, but if you don't, you're going to be like, what? And some people are going to judge you or may feel like you're crazy or some other negative term. And so that's a barrier for people going into therapy. I go in just sad, and I come out with some kind of list of different names that I call myself, and people look at me differently now. The other thing that I kind of realized that when talking to therapists is, I liken it to like a house. If you walked into a house that was dirty and your shoes were dirty, you may not even notice that you're tracking in dirt. And this is kind of like what we do when we talk to friends, family. Some people, they'll put all their business on social media, but society is already dirty. It's like you can go to somebody else's page, and I seen like a weird post where somebody was doing it wasn't a gender reveal, but it was like a baby daddy reveal, like guessing. It was odd, but it was like, well, I wouldn't have put that, but do you? But again, there's, if I was to post all my dirt, I can go find dirt on other people, and the whole, space is kind of dirty. But when you go into therapy, you're walking into a place that's like clean and sanitized because the therapist can't bring their dirt and their problems in to talk to you as a client. So now you're walking through and you're tracking mud, your problems, and you're looking back like, oh, I'm kind of making a mess here. You go in and you're thinking, well, I got a friend that I hate, or I hate my boss. Well, society said I shouldn't hate people. So maybe I'll say I don't like them. But I don't really think I have a good reason not to like them. So maybe I'll say I just don't like how they treat me. So now you're in therapy working on a completely different problem than what you needed to work on. So what I did on the community portion is that I am working with actual therapists and collaborating with them to, number one, utilize my lore to build that distancing language within therapy. Instead of saying, you're hurt, you may be like, I feel hollow. You can talk about, if you're having trouble believing in yourself, and there's, as for you, you're a very ambitious person. Look at the podcast. I seen your piece on WBTW, and you may have what I would call salinity, in your head, the inner critic saying, oh, well, are you really ambitious? Are you just avoiding? Are you being delusional? Do you really think you deserve to be, rich? Or do you think you deserve to be successful or help people? You may have that doubt of, is what I'm doing really helping people? And being able to externalize voices and externalize things again help you see them as not as part of yourself. So that's another piece. And the other part of that was I built a translator that takes that information and allows you to export it out in different frameworks. So if CBT isn't for you, so that therapist wasn't for you, instead of having to go through and retell all your trauma and stuff that you're trying to work through again and maybe leaving some out, or you're getting exhausted of retelling it, you can export it out in another framework, narrative therapy, IFS, ACT, and now you tell your story once and you can go to different therapists and basically almost like giving them a resume, and you can kind of test it out a lot easier. And then the last piece of everything was I built a shop, and my shop focus was for some people, they need physical items to help, or they need something physical. I knew I did. I got 2 tattoos after my grandmother passed because trying to process it internally, I couldn't do it. But the tattoos kind of helped me externalize it and have something to look at on my arms and be like, okay, she's still here, she's still in, kind of understand, until I got older to be able to deal with things better. And so that led me to making different products that basically acknowledge the weight that different different people may carry. So there's caregiver shirts, there's nurses shirts, there's firefighters, and it falls into that middle gap that I think gets missed, where you have a lot of dark humor stuff, and then you have positive and then toxic positive, I call it, where unless you're already through the problem, you're probably not wearing the toxic positive stuff. But there's nothing really in the middle that acknowledges when you're going through it, when you're in the grief, in the mix of it, that says, you're forged and not broken, that, you're mourning someone that's still here, and it's okay because, this doesn't give you the same type of recognition, because, if there's a funeral and there's flowers, people come up and tell you, oh, I feel bad, I'm sorry. But when there's no funeral, no flowers, you still are going through this mourning and you still dealing with this, but you don't get that same validation. So I started creating things for people that basically honors those gaps that I feel I've seen in society during the time.
Wow, that's great. Can you tell us the name of your website and where the podcast family can obtain this information?
The website name is VaelorinVerse.com. That's VaeloRI.com. And that's the best place to, from there, you can find the shop, you can find the folklore, you can find the community section where, there's Threadweave, which is the translator I'm working on. There's also a journal that I started, and I call it the threaded journal, that kind of help you keep track of if you're starting to change and use more negative language than positive, or hollow language or lucent. Like I said, I use lower terms. And so again, it's all free as far as the things on the site. Now the shop, you can find items that represent, you know, what you're feeling. For mothers who may have lost children, there's things for them. There's things for people who lost parents. A lot of it, like I said, is kind of just whether you want audio or whether you want to read, whether you want something physical or whether you're more on the side of trying to get into therapy. There's different paths and there's different doors for everyone. So you don't always have to enter through the same door, but you know, it's more about achieving where you need to go. And that's what I'm hoping my site will provide.
That's awesome. And podcast family, you know how I do things. So everything that Justin has just shared will be in the description of this episode, including the website link. All you'll need to do is just read through the description of this episode and the link will be there, and you can either copy and paste it and or just click on the link directly in the description of this episode. All right. Well, Justin, thank you very much again for agreeing to come on to be a guest on Mama Mabel's Caregivers podcast. It has truly been just a blessing to have you on the show today. I know that I speak for all of the podcast family, including myself, when I say that we sincerely appreciate you.
Thank you so deeply for having me. And I deeply appreciate the opportunity you afforded me for coming on. And if even just one person can get something out of this, I would be highly happy.
Amen. Amen to that. I'm sure what you have created will provide the podcast family with great value. So thank you again. Podcast family, until next time.